Hey, everybody, it's Brett, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Behind the Stack. Today, I am talking with author Jean Hanff Korelitz, whose new book, which is out now, called The Sequel. Jean is the author of 9 novels, including The Plot, The Latecomer, You Should Have Known, Admission, The Devil and Daniel Webster, The White Rose, The Sabbath Day River, and A Jury of Her Peers. Korelitz lives in New York City with her husband, the Irish poet Paul Muldoon, and her 2 grown children. So sit back and enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I'm thrilled and so happy that you're with me today for our audience, Jean Hanff Korelitz, with her new book, The Sequel, which is so fantastic. I suddenly almost descended into Oprah territory. The sequel! Um,
Just don't give everybody a free copy.
Exactly. You get a copy. Reach under your chair. Yeah, exactly.
Wherever you are, reach under
Wherever you are, it's magic. No, it really, I loved it so much. I loved the plot as well, but I have to say that I think you've done that thing that's not always possible, which is you've made the sequel even better than the original to me.
Oh, thank you. Well, of course, that's the thing that even as you're writing, the first line, you're thinking, and they're going to say it's not as good as the first one, because that's almost always true.
I would love for you to share with our listeners, with our viewers, your kind of origin story in terms of your writing, because I know you started as a poet.
That's right.
But then how you got into the book world.
I'm glad that I started as a poet. I think it really teaches you to kind of write with your ears. I still can't leave an ugly sentence on the page. I'm sure I've written many ugly sentences, ugly to other people, but if it's ugly to me, I have this compulsion to fix it. And I think that comes from poetry. But I always wanted to write fiction. I love the novel above all other forms of writing, but I was terrified. And, all you have to do is think about what a novel is to really feel the terror. I mean, it is an absolutely terrifying prospect to sit down and write something that's going to take you years. It might not work. You might have to throw it out. Everybody might reject it. Everybody might hate it. It's not like writing a poem where, you invest a few days or a week. My husband, who's a poet, might work on a poem for a week. It's a week. I mean, you don't want to waste a week on something that doesn't work, but imagine wasting years of your life on this thing that doesn't work. So yeah, I mean, there are so many reasons not to do it. There's a reason why we invented the concept of writer's block, to explain why we can't do it. It was just a very frightening prospect. And so I wrote poetry until my mid-20s, until I was frankly brave enough to try and fail again, fail better. Like Beckett says, until finally I wrote something that somebody wanted to publish.
And that was the first book.
Right. And that was actually a thriller. I'd had a couple of novels rejected in many, 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 many places. And I just reached a point where I thought I need to write something that somebody will publish. I mean, it was really, really important to me. And I just had a baby, my first child, and I was really scared that I had run out of time to be the artiste that I thought I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So I said, now I'm gonna sit down in the few hours that I have each afternoon when the babysitter comes, and I am going to write something that somebody will publish. And it was, the time of Grisham and Thoreau, and I did have an idea for a story about a lawyer, even though I'd never gone to law school. And I wrote it, and somebody published it. It was fantastic. But then they wanted me to write a sequel to it. And I saw that road kind of unfurling before me, where I would be, a thriller writer, a whodunit writer. And that wasn't what I wanted at that time. I wanted to be a literary novelist.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's so funny because I have to read you this. I was just tooling around yesterday on the internet about you. And this is from this site called Book Series in Order. And it said, the American writer Jean Hanff Korelitz is well known for her suspense-fueled thrillers and mysteries. And I was like, well, she's written a lot of other things too.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating how you can get pigeonholed so quickly. It's in listening to some of your previous conversations and the way you talk about writing and the process and the work and exactly this, getting pigeonholed. It's not so different, as I told you before, I'm a casting director, but it's not so different from many actors who get pigeonholed into something and are really trying to break out. The actor who's only known for dramas who suddenly does a comedy, or
Right,
the comedic, vice versa. So I found that fascinating how many artists find themselves caught in the lane. So kudos to you for knowing, well, I'm going to actually take this road and sticking to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you for giving me some undeserved credit here. I really was not in control of the situation at all. I mean, I would say to anybody who's about to start a writing career and wants to, get 7 or 8 novels into it without anybody knowing they exist, the best thing they could do would be to not choose a genre. Um, I mean, when the plot was published, and it kind of around the same time as The Undoing appeared on TV, and suddenly people went, "Oh, who is this brand new writer, this brand new, very elderly writer?" And I would say, that was novel number 7, and I'm like, "Well, I never heard of you." And I think the reason for that is that I just could not settle. I love plot. I loved to be surprised in a novel. I love to surprise other people, but I insist on good prose. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
necessary to me as a reader, and I have a compulsion to write it as a writer. By the way, many people may disagree with me, and that's fine. But I certainly cannot, leave it alone if I think it could be better. If I think a sentence could be better, I'm not going on to the next sentence. And I keep seeing things that I wish I'd made better every time I look at the prose. I gave a reading from the sequel the other night, and I've got my pen out making corrections on the page. It's a compulsion.
So you're not able to, when you're finished, say, this is done, like, well, I've turned the last in. It still sticks with
I
you?
say it, but I'm wrong because, then you open it up and you think, I cannot believe I wrote that sentence and I left it there when it clearly needs a comma there, and it needs a better word there, and it jams against the next sentence. And why didn't I notice that? I mean, they're just,
I
it's
hate the thought that you left that reading and then went home and tossed all night over that sentence that you could have
I
adjusted.
did. I really did. And that's not even to mention the things that other people have brought to my attention, misspellings. I can't tell you how many letters I got about something I said in The Latecomer, which is the novel that came out right before the sequel. I said something about Henry Ford that was incorrect. And I eventually decided to leave it there because the point I was making in the sentence I thought was more important than the factual. But if I'd had a chance to write it the first time and get it right, I would have found a different way to make my point and not be incorrect. So far, the biggest problem in the sequel is I misspelled a winemaker in Napa Valley. So I hope they'll forgive me. We should have
Exactly.
caught it, but we didn't.
So, okay, for our viewers and listeners who aren't completely familiar, and I should preface this by saying, if you haven't read the plot yet, you might be screwed because we're going to give some stuff up. So hopefully, and if you haven't read the plot yet, stop this recording or wherever you're listening, go read the plot, and then come back for this. So can you give a kind of a log line for?
Sure. Oh, a log line. Oh, that's a very TV thing to say, a log line.
Well, you can take the boy
Uh,
out of Hollywood.
yeah.
So.
It's a story about a writer, a sort of downwardly mobile writer who is failing in his career, failing to write, failing to succeed. And he's teaching in a really low prestige MFA program in northern Vermont when into his classroom comes the most arrogant student he's ever had. He basically says, well, I don't need any of you people because I am writing something that is going to make me rich and famous, and it cannot fail. And we do hear this. I'm sure you hear this too. Most people in the arts have experienced some version of somebody coming up to them and saying, I'm the greatest star, I am by far, etc.
But no,
And
one
in
said.
this case, well, the version that we novelists get is, I have the best plot. You write it, and we'll split the money. First of all, there is Second of all, I should take your word on this plot being so great when, as we all know, there are only 7 plots. There are Slaying the Monster, Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, Bildungsroman. Joseph
Right.
Campbell did all this for us. There are 7 plots. So, your boy growing up in obscurity and becoming the CEO of the trucking company is fantastic, but it is one
Right.
of the 7 plots. So I'm
Right.
not going to write it for you in
Variations on a theme.
exactly. But anyway, back to the plot. He assumes that this student is just the usual sort of jerk, but then the young writer, tells him the plot, and he knows that it's absolutely true. This writer is going. It doesn't matter how good the writing is; it is going to be a phenomenon. And a few years go by, and he's, if possible, even lower in his prospects. And it occurs to him that he's never seen this book come out. And, he would have heard about it. It is that unusual, this story. And he Googles the guy and discovers that he's dead. And he died very soon after their encounter. So this book does not exist. And he has this kind of long night of the soul where he, has to decide, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to take this story and write it? Or am I going to say, no, I'm going to walk away? And of course, he's a writer, so it's a clear answer. Of course, he's going to write this story. This is not a question of plagiarism. There is nothing to plagiarize. He saw maybe a couple of pages of an excerpt that the young writer submitted for the course that they were doing together, but there is nothing to steal, just the story. So he takes the story, he writes a novel, it becomes massively successful, of course, but he can't enjoy it because he's too terrified that somebody is going to come out of the woodwork and accuse him of something. And even though he doesn't feel that what he did was incorrect, the appearance of impropriety is enough to end a literary career or any other kind of career today. And he knows that. And eventually that's exactly what happens. Somebody does emerge to accuse him of various crimes. And the plot is really about his trying to figure out who this person is, what they want, and how he can stop them.
Yes. And so that brings us to the sequel.
Which is a name my agent presented me with. The minute I said, I'm thinking of writing a sequel, she said, yes. And we're going to call it The Sequel.
Yeah, that's genius. That's genius.
So genius. Yeah.
It's so genius and so meta,
So meta.
which is much of the book is anyway. But you finish the plot. Was there any inkling in your mind, like, you know what, this could go someplace else?
No, actually, that's not really the way my brain worked at the time. I was ecstatic to have finished that book in a pandemic in 4 months. Unlike the book that I put aside in order to write the plot, it just came straight out and it was required not too much revision. And I'd really been struggling on a novel called The Latecomer, which I was really, really not making progress with at all. So to have this kind of get up in the morning and just write all day experience was in itself, a kind of blessing, especially in the middle of those first months of the pandemic when there was so much uncertainty and so much fear. So, I was grateful to have gotten the thing done. It never occurred to me that I would come back to these characters. Some of them weren't alive anymore.
Yeah.
What was there to come back to? And then I had an idea. And that's when I said to my agent, I'm thinking of continuing with this character.
Was it a larger labor this time? It didn't come as fast.
It was pretty fast, not pandemic fast. Thank
Sure.
goodness. We were able to go out to dinner with our friends and go to the movies and do the other stuff that I wasn't doing in in the spring of 2020. It was difficult in a different way. And that is because when you write a sequel, as I now have discovered, you have to color within the lines that you have put down in that first book. You can't change the character. You can't change time. You can't change the facts. You have to abide by the rules you made in the earlier book when you didn't realize that you would ever revisit any of this. So, for example, I mean, people say, well, did you know you're going to do this? If I had known, I would have laid clues for myself to use later. I would have given myself so much more to work with. For example, there's a piece of furniture that, has a lot of weight on it because it is the only piece of furniture that happens to have remained in a particular house after the earlier owners have left and the present owners have come in. I mean, that's a statement that will make no sense to anybody listening to this podcast
Unless you've read it.
unless they've read the plot. And I mean, to have this physical object that spans the time period of both stories, was so valuable that it becomes extremely important.
Yeah. It's a generational piece, we might say.
A generational piece, that's right.
I'm so curious because of sheer construction of a book like this. Do you work with a very detailed outline? Is it broad strokes? Do you know where you're going to? Did you ever know where you were going to end necessarily? Or did things just kind of surprise you as you went along?
Oh, I was going to say the answer to all of the things was no, but of course the answer to the final thing is yes. I do not work with outlines. I think I'm not condemning them for anybody else. I mean, I think the object of the exercise is to get the words on the page, and whatever helps and whatever makes you do that is kosher as far as I'm concerned. For me, no, because I find that if I know where I'm going, I'm just connecting the dots and there's no surprise for me. And if there's no surprise for me, there's no surprise for you. So yeah, this is part of the terror of writing a novel. You don't know what's going to happen. You're just hoping like hell that it's going to work out. I have this, to me, the kind of working metaphor is that I keep eliminating things that are not good.
I thought you meant
Obvious
people.
things. Well, not even that, but like, it's his long lost twin brother,
Yes.
he was in a fugue state when he did it. All these things are just stupid. And once you've eliminated all those things, you're just hoping like hell that there is something left that you didn't anticipate and that therefore the reader didn't anticipate either. So that's the hope, that you'll sort of get all the way down to the end of the corner, having shut all those doors because they were too obvious, and that there will be something still there.
Now, as you're going through, and I'm speaking specifically to this novel and probably the plot as well, do you share it with anyone, like your husband or anyone, to say, read this and tell me if this makes sense? Or do you
While
keep
I'm
it?
going through it, no. When I get to the end of the first draft, I share it with my best friend from college, who's also an LA person, and my agent. And they are two extremely insightful readers. And when they say it's good, I believe them, which I tend not to believe anybody else. But when they say it, I believe them.
So I do want to talk about Anna. She's it seems weird to say, but she's so much fun. She really is. And the way that many anti-heroes are fun to kind of watch. Was it ever hard creating this person who does some despicable things, but you're still, I can speak personally here, you find yourself rooting for her a little bit. Does that
Yeah.
make me weird?
Yes, you are weird. No, but I mean, when we read about Ripley, I mean, he's a vile
Sure, that's
human
exactly
being,
right.
and yet we want him to elude the police because we want to see what he does next. And also we're sympathetic to his what made him the way he is. I have to say that my husband and I went to see The Apprentice the other night.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
leaned up in the middle and I said, this is weirdly sympathetic to him because you
I've
see
heard
the
that as a cousin. Yeah.
monster. His family situation was just awful, and still produced, in my opinion, a vile human being. But
Of course.
at least you understand. So, like with Anna, by the end of the sequel, we know a lot more about how she became what she became. She's not a person who sanctifies human life. That's for sure. She's not me. That's for sure. But I never had a problem writing unlikable people. I think they're fascinating. And I don't, by design, have a lot of them in my life because if they are unlikable, I try not to keep them in my life. So it's a
Sure.
way to kind of hang out with really terrible people without having to like have coffee.
Hang out with terrible people. Was there ever a moment when you were writing her and you thought, well, no, I can't have her do that. That's too far.
Yeah, there were some. I mean, the thing about Anna, I mean, you could argue that killing somebody is a cruel act, but she doesn't lead with cruelty. She's not creating unnecessary suffering. Her means of murder are rather quick and often painless. I'm not
Sympathetic dispatch.
sympathetic dispatch. I don't like violence. I take no pleasure in the suffering of other people. Um, I can't write it. So there are plenty of books that I can't read because there's too much cruelty in them. I once read a novel by an extremely famous and successful writer of suspense that was so violent and uh, just horrific torture that I actually took the step of putting a note in it was a library copy and saying, I'm please be very careful and your decision to read this book. It is full of sexual violence. And I mean, I've never done that before. I don't believe in
You gave
book.
your content warnings. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was like the 80s, so it was a long time ago, but it was that bad. I mean, I could never write anything like that. But, Anna does suffer. And if you were to ask her, "Hey, Anna, why have you done all these things? Why do you behave this way towards other people?" She would say, "I've never done anything to anyone who hasn't harmed me first, and if only people had just left me alone, none of this would
Sure.
ever have had to happen." This is somebody who just wants to live her life and is imposed upon in ways that no one should be imposed upon. Now, a lot of people are imposed upon. They don't grow up to be icy cold murderers of other people, thank goodness. But you kind of get it too.
Yeah. No, that's what makes it work, because you do see her side in a lot of it and you think, well, okay, I might not go that far, but
Yeah,
good on her.
yeah,
So much of the book, because of what she's going through, you really satirize the whole publishing industry, like soup to nuts, from the construction of a novel down through book tours, which that's one of the greatest joys. It's so funny and so spot on. I couldn't help but wonder if you were kind of exercising some of your own demons with the industry as you were doing this.
I have been incredibly fortunate, and not because I've been beautifully and enthusiastically published from the beginning of my career. I haven't been. I mean, that has only happened in the last uh, few books at Macmillan. I mean, I'm having, I think I refer to it as the Rolls Royce of publishing experiences, but I certainly had all the awful experiences that other people had. And, I've been around for a long time. So I've seen, my contemporaries just sail into print in our 20s while I was, not able to get books published. I'm a human being. I was very jealous. And yet I've seen those careers fall off. And I've come to believe that it's not necessarily a good thing to have a huge hit right out of the gate. Um, I'm
100%.
having a really weird publishing career in that I've been knocking around for so long that, I was there all the time. It's like Agatha all
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
But people didn't know about me, and now there are all these novels for people to read if they like these more recent books. They're just sitting there.
Yeah. I said this earlier and I keep hearing it in what you're saying, but so much of the way you talk about your own career, it mirrors so many lives of so many actors.
Yeah,
And I don't think it limits it that it could be musicians, anyone in the arts, more so than many other jobs. I don't know many people who are like, God, I've been a money investor for so many years. I'm just waiting for that moment. It's such a different thing. And I think some of it is you just never know, and it's longevity. And it must have felt for you at times like you were almost working in a vacuum because you're getting
yeah,
stuff out there.
yeah. But I didn't. I had something going for me, and that was I had an agent who really believed in me, and she could have dropped me, after every single book. I mean, she came on with my third novel, and the novels didn't make any money. No, not many people were reading them. And she had every right to say, "Hey, we gave it four good books and we're going to like say goodbye now." And she never did. And then soon after I was taken on by this wonderful editor. And I really feel that these two women have held me up through many books and a lot of frustration. And they're, by the way, they are kind of mildly satirized in the novel itself. And they are so in love with their portrayals, even though they're not entirely positive, they're made fun of too, that they volunteered to do a kind of sweepstakes where somebody could buy the book and enter the sweepstakes, and then they would have lunch with this person. It's just
Oh my
like
God,
they have
that's
lunch
genius.
in the book. So just they're just so terrific, and I'm so grateful to them. And I mean, I could not have done it without them.
I love that. You know, one of the things you do have, among many things, is you've had an incredible track record with so many of your books getting adapted. And I know now the plot is being developed with Mahershala Ali, which is just fantastic. How is that experience? How involved have you been? Is it easy for you to just say, okay, this is my piece. I'm letting it go because I know things. I mean, listen, I saw The Undoing and I was like, this is kind of the book.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I remember reading that book when it first came out. And, you know, so I wonder what that experience is like for you.
I'm glad that I had the experience of admission being made into the 2013 film with Tina Fey first, because that was the lesson of, it's not going to be your book. And
Mm.
that was a much gentler adaptation than You Should Have Known to The Undoing. But I mean, I have nothing bad to say about what David E. Kelley did. He told me from the get-go that it was going to be different. It was going to be more of a whodunit. He also told me that the first time he encountered the novel You Should Have Known, he passed on it because, in his words, it decelerated in the last third, which is, I guess, not what you want in a TV show. You want
Mm.
acceleration. And the novel You Should Have Known is really about this woman kind of losing her life, having her life fall apart and then rebuilding her life. So a deceleration, no helicopters, no, child abductions, nothing like that, no trial in the novel. So he said he kept thinking about the book and he decided that he liked the characters and the situation, but he wanted to go in a different direction. And I said, "You are David E. Kelley. You are, do whatever you want." And it was very, very different. I think after the second episode of the show, it really was a totally different story.
Yeah.
And as a result, I didn't even know who did it before I sat down to watch the final episode. I guessed, but I was wrong. So there you go. You just have to let go. You really just have to let go. And, nobody's making you sell your novel for an adaptation. You did that yourself. So just let go and hope that people will say, "There's a book. I want to read the book."
I understand. But I think if you speak to many authors, that is the great hope that, oh God, maybe somebody's going to take this on and give it some kind of other life. One of the things that's so clever that you do in the book that I love so much is having the chapters. Each chapter is the name of a sequel, which, I didn't look in the end of the book for the reference when I started it. And moron that I was probably about halfway through and I was like, my God, and then of course I started to turn backwards. But not only, but to me, not only are you making each chapter the name of a sequel of a book, they really do match
They
what
do.
is happening within that chapter,
Yeah, they
which
do.
is genius. How long did that take you?
I was on a flight to LA actually, and I was thinking about the title of Erica Jong's sequel to Fear of Flying, which is How to Save Your Own Life. And that's a great novel. It's one of my favorite sequels, actually. And I read it without knowing it was a sequel. I was a teenager, and I think it had like a sexy cover. So I probably read it because of that.
Right.
It's a wonderful novel. Later, of course, I did read Fear of Flying, another wonderful novel. And I was thinking how appropriate that title, How to Save Your Own Life, would be for one particular chapter late in the sequel. And then I thought, maybe I'll make them all the titles of sequels. And I didn't do it right away. I started compiling a list of sequel titles that I thought would work. And there are plenty of sequel titles that wouldn't work, like Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It's not going to work.
Right.
But How to Save Your Own Life will work. It Starts With Us will work. Dr. Sleep will work. So I just wrote down as many as I could. And then when I finished and I had the manuscript, I started going through and mixing and matching and trying to attach every title of a sequel with something that was happening in that chapter. So, How to Save Your Own Life, that went to a very obvious place.
Yep.
It Starts With Us, obviously went to the first chapter. And, it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, it's really it's such a nice understated touch, but I was clearly aware the work went into this. So it's
Well,
really
it
brilliant.
wasn't so much work. That part was fun because, after all, I didn't write any of those sequel
Yeah,
titles.
sure. But even just finding what the words were in that particular title that would adhere to something that's going on in that particular chapter.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
it was my little reward for writing the rest of the book.
Now, is your personal reading as varied as your books are?
I would say yes. Probably more remarkable for what I don't read. I don't read science fiction, fantasy, westerns, romance, or whodunits. I do read literary fiction, thrillers, biographies, nonfiction. I think, I don't read short stories. I'm just, it's just not my form. Recently, I tried to read Advice for Cleaning Women because it was on that list of the 100 best books
Yeah, the
published
New York
since
Times.
2000. And she was an amazing writer. But still, after about 6 short stories, I couldn't go on. I wanted a novel. It's just, as Woody Allen said, the heart wants what it wants.
Yeah, I find it with my problem with short stories, and I always said this, although it's funny because this year I've stumbled across a patch of them that I thought were great, but I always find I like about 60% of them and the other 40% I don't. So I want to be with certain characters for a longer time. I want something to
Yeah.
expand into something more full. I will say there's one book that came out this year. Do you ever do audiobooks?
Oh, constantly.
Okay. Well, here's an audiobook you have to get. Ben Shattuck wrote this book that came out this year called The History of Sound, which are around 12 stories that are kind of interconnected. They're all set up around the New England area and goes up into Canada. The audio book is a full cast with Chris Cooper, Paul Mescal, and the first story in that collection, Paul Mescal is going to star in the feature. It is fantastic. One of the best audiobooks I've ever heard. These
I'm
performances
I'm I'm
are
looking it up
next
right
level.
now. The History of Sound. Here it is.
So I would
Okay.
say check it out, and maybe that'll break your streak a little bit.
Okay.
The last thing I really wanted you to talk about for a moment doesn't have really anything to do with the book. It has to do with you, and I love that you do this so much. I discovered it, which is Book the Writer.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this? I think this is
Sure.
so amazing, and it makes me want to move back east just so
Oh,
I
you
can
don't have to. We're
participate.
on Zoom now too. I mean, we are in person, but we also have an active Zoom for every event. But it came out of something that I used to do when I lived in Princeton, New Jersey for many years. And I started it as a fundraiser for my kids' school. And it was a Quaker school, and they weren't into kind of flashy, ski chalet
Hmm.
vacations and things. It was like, let's do bread baking and stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't want to do bread baking. And the mistress or the head of school said, well, you know all these writers. Why don't you have a book group where the writers come? And I thought, okay, I can do that. So for about 10 years, I ran this book group in Princeton where the author would come. And the members of the book group made a donation to the school. And that was a lot of fun.
Did you do
Um,
this out of your home?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't pay the authors, although we would sell 20 copies of their book, and for most of us that's a big deal. But then when I moved back home to New York, I thought, well, maybe this can be a business. So we converted it into something called Book the Writer, and we call them pop-up book groups. It's not a book group where you're with the same people every month. You're with whoever is first to buy the 20 tickets. And the author is there, and we're in somebody's fantastic home. which is why our unofficial slogan is "Come for the literature, stay for the real estate." Because usually the apartments are just spectacular. One of the apartments that we use frequently is the Mrs. Maisel apartment, where
Oh my
they
God.
filmed
Wow.
the pilot of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and that's a lot of fun. But we've got about a dozen really spectacular apartments at this point. The other night we had Joyce Carol Oates.
Mm.
And before that, this fall, we had Michael Cunningham. We have Griffin Dunn coming up, Moon Unit Zappa, just to round out the LA ness. I'm looking forward to her memoir. And it's a mixture of literary fiction. We tend to have one or two biographies a year, some nonfiction, lots of memoirs. And the wonderful thing about it is that everybody who comes to one of these gatherings really wants to be there. I mean, nobody is there because, oh, it's Susie's turn to pick the book, and
The
Susie
host.
always has such awful taste. And, you chose to be at that book group. You bought a ticket for that book group. And it's everybody reads the book beforehand. So you get past, what's your book about? You really
Yeah.
get to a very deep level of conversation about the book. And, we've had actors. We've had Steve Martin and Juliana Margulies and Rachel Dratch. And, you know, I'm interested in comedies, so I try to get all the comedians. Sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. But I'm always amazed at who says yes. I mean, Steve Martin doesn't have to sit down with 20 people who read his novel. But, I think many people don't actually have that opportunity to have a conversation with 20 intelligent people who've committed 10 hours to reading their fiction. So it's a nice experience. And then during the pandemic, we did go online because our regulars were kind of begging me to do it. They really missed the conversations. And after the
Sure.
pandemic, I didn't want to lose those people. So now we have a Zoom concurrent with the gathering, and people on the Zoom can ask questions also. They just, you know, unmute themselves and ask. And so that's very nice.
I think it's amazing. I
It's
like
a lot of fun. Yeah.
I really, and I would think people would be jumping at it, frankly, on both sides.
Well,
I think authors would really be enthusiastic about it, but readers especially. What an opportunity to, it's a treat.
yeah, it is a treat, and it's very meaningful to me. Like the other night, as I said, we had Joyce Carol Oates talking about her new novel Butcher, and there was
Hmm.
somebody online who said, you've been my favorite novelist for many, many years, and I've read everything you've written, which for Joyce is a lot
Oh
of
my
reading.
God. Right. Exactly.
Um, and to say I've always wanted to ask you this question. So, I mean, that was a person who wasn't in New York. They were, I don't know where they were, but they were in a different city. But to be able to facilitate that is great, and also to have a reader discover a new novelist or a new writer for them is great. I hadn't heard of you, but I was free on this night, so I signed up, and now I love your book, and I'm going to read everything that you've written. So it's a very pleasant experience, and I will keep doing it as long as I have the energy to do it. It is a lot of work, um, but yeah,
Yeah. It's interesting too, because, you know, having been in my job that I've done forever, I don't get, I don't know if starstruck is the word, but I don't get that normally with many actors. I have gotten that with writers, and I think part of it is, first of all, writer reading is such a solitary and an intimate thing, and you're
yeah,
kind of in this dialogue with a writer and what their story they're giving
yeah.
you and
They're in your
unspooling.
head,
They're
absolutely.
in your head. And until recently, again, we were talking about this earlier with kind of the pandemic, writers have now very much come to the foreground in ways that they hadn't done before. They're speaking, we're seeing more of them. Personally, for me, I have such a reverence for what you do and for you as an artist and the way that a writer creates, that I think, you know, look, I know I could act. I don't know that I could do ever what you do. And so for that, I'm in so much awe of the craft, of how you construct, of how you think, and the work that goes behind it. So I think this opportunity to be able to marry these and bring in people that um, really get to sit down with people and pick your brains in terms of how it
Yes.
all comes together is, I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's fantastic.
I well, thank you. If I ever needed any more encouragement to keep doing it, I that means a lot. You should come to one of our events. I mean, I'll just put you in the Zoom room. You'll enjoy it.
No, I'm going to look at them. I absolutely would love to do that. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I so appreciate it. Congratulations on the success of the book. It's
Thanks,
fantastic.
Greg.
I will link not only you on social media, but also BookTheWriter so people can check that out, which
Thanks.
I think is so incredible. And please, everyone, get the sequel and the plot and all of her other books. I will have a link on my bookshop.org page, which will have all of your books up there for people to get. And please buy independent if you can. Jean, have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll talk soon.